Welcome to the NFT Finance Podcast, sponsored by Goldman Sachs. My name is Terry, and I'm joined by my co-host Helmus. And today we welcome Spencer and Jeremy from Collection.xyz, a liquidity incentive protocol for NFTs.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us on the show. I guess to start it off, how we do this with every other guest is just a quick background on how you got into crypto, NFTs, and really how the ideation of Collection.xyz kind of came together. And maybe let's start with Jeremy and Spencer. You can jump in right after.
Sure. So I started crypto full-time in 2017, 2018. It was the kind of token boom. And I kind of did that whole thing where I did a bit of advisory, joined an angel network before kind of starting a hedge fund together with Spencer, which then got acquired by CoinMarketCap during 2019. And then we worked together before the acquisition of Binance. I'm sure Spencer can tell you more about that. Where in CoinMarketCap, I was the VP of product. After that, I joined Chainlink in a similar kind of product role. And then after Chainlink, I became a contributor to some DeFi protocols before starting Gomu and Collection.xyz with Spencer.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having us on the podcast. So I've been in crypto myself for a similar time as Jeremy. First got into the industry in 2017 by just getting involved, learning from people that I knew in the space, started investing and also helping advise some projects, here and there. I think my first touch with NFTs was really in 2018, sometime after the launch of this project called CryptoKitties. Had the opportunity to help them out to expand and think about a strategy for Asia. At the time, I ran a small consulting shop, and we worked with Animoca brands to essentially conceptualize how essentially we can just basically reach out to more Asia-based KOLs and so on. We spent a ton of time doing research, talk to stakeholders and stuff. And honestly, after that, just kind of left NFTs as an interest, just as a hobby more of, and started the trading shop with Jeremy and a couple of other friends of ours. And then fast forward 2 years later, the company was acquired by, of course, we were first acquired by CoinMarketCap, and then Binance came in and offered to acquire the company. We essentially completed the acquisition in 2020, and thereafter I joined actually Coinbase to work on product for derivatives, DEX, as well as a Coinbase wallet. So spent a lot of time thinking about these self-custody problems. And then I think it's kind of during my time at Coinbase Wallet where I was like, okay, I think the UX and Web3 interactions, it's still really hard for developers, which is why we started looking at maybe possibly investing our time in building out an NFT infrastructure company, and hence Gomu.co and Collection.xyz.
So for our listeners, maybe you guys can delineate the difference between Gomu and Collection.xyz.
Sure. So Gomu is really sort of the software company that we started to build. And Gomu has a suite of products focusing on NFT APIs and SDKs. It makes it easier for developers to essentially use the APIs, make a couple of calls, and query NFT-related data, secondary trading, order book listings across marketplaces, and so on. And on the back of that, we essentially also built a white label NFT marketplace product. And I think for Collection.xyz, essentially, is a project that our team started about 3 to 4 months ago to look into. It's our first foray into the NFT finance space. And since then, we've just been spending more and more time, and I would say about 70 or 80% of our time on from an ideation and product innovation perspective. And just because we have a pretty decent background between us in terms of DeFi, DEX work, non-custodial wallets, and oracles related stuff, we find that naturally speaking, the NFT finance category was just a really nice place for us to apply some of our chops in, I suppose.
Makes sense. So at the highest level, what does Collection.xyz aim to solve?
Yeah, maybe I can take this one. So we started basically solving the issue where there's no good way to kind of incentivize liquidity on existing kind of AMM protocols. I know I'm using quite a few of these terms, but I mean, primarily the one that is most popular is Sudoswap, right? And there's no good way to incentivize liquidity. But what we did was build Collection.xyz, which is the first product that really incentivizes liquidity and integrates quite well with Sudoswap. So there were two innovations that we kind of did right from the get-go. One is to tokenize the ownership of the trading pool that you set up when you set up a Uniswap AMM, so that the owner of the pool becomes the owner of the token becomes the owner of the pool. So if you transfer the token to another owner, say a vault, that vault could ensure the custody and safekeeping of the pool, as well as ensure that the parameters of the pool are not changed, for example, the fees or the delta. The other thing that we did was make it so that anyone, literally it's an open protocol, can create an incentive vault and load it up with ERC20 tokens. So, for example, it could be USDC, WEF, Goblin Coin, anything, right? Any ERC20 token. So when you have these things set up, you can target a certain vault parameter. So you can say, I want a certain delta, meaning price change after each trade, or fees or less. You essentially ensure that you are getting liquidity or incentivizing liquidity at a specific set of parameters that you care about as a vault, right? So I think once we launched this product, we saw and received a lot of feedback from the community. And I think we're starting to see some of these problems and starting to address some of the problems that we've heard from the community. So we're really prioritizing kind of shipping over white paper. So we don't really speak about the things that we are going to build, or rather we don't really have these things stated on the website, but we're definitely happy to discuss any of these problems that we're trying to solve.
Gotcha. And then from, I guess, like, let's assume some of our listeners don't really know like the importance of like why a liquidity incentive program is important to live on an AMM. Can you guys maybe just like talk to why this is important and how this, what problem this potentially solves?
Right.
Yeah, sounds good. So maybe taking a step back and to a point, we can maybe share a little bit about the AMN part of things as well, and then talk a little bit about the liquidity incentive side of things. So we think that the AMN is a really important structure in NFT finance because it provides an additional choice for users. So the user can then essentially choose to be a liquidity provider by committing like NFTs and ETH into a potential pool. If the price in this case of the general NFT market is volatile, but fairly stable, the liquidity provider and essentially the pool that is created will be able to facilitate many buy and sell orders from this market participants. And then the fees accrued can possibly compensate the liquidity provider. And of course, it's a great source of yield and rewards in this particular market situation. And we think that it's not enough because while it enables a more liquid market as more and more ETH and NFTs are locked in, but with the idea of incentives and vaults and so on, it can possibly add additional fuel to this equation. And we think that these liquidity incentives can be possibly in the form of ERC20 tokens, which is our current implementation on Collection, or it could even be NFTs like ERC721s or ERC155s. And we've learned really how important it is to help projects get started. And we've seen some similar primitives in the DeFi part of the crypto ecosystem as well. And if you look at projects like Sudoswap, that's kind of how they started back in the day as well. So I think from our perspective, we're just kind of like putting our, in a way, stake on the ground and also contributing to the space in terms of an experimentation to see how we can possibly create just more interesting staking mechanisms, liquidity reward mechanisms that, is more complex than what we've seen so far with some of the other projects like ApeCoin and so on.
Can you give us an Alice and Bob example of a vault creator and or say a trader or someone who'd want to harvest liquidity incentives on Collection?
Sure. This is going to be an interesting one, but let me try it. So in this particular case, assuming that you have Alice, and Alice is maybe a project owner of a pretty popular collection called Snake Coin, right? Or Snake NFT collection. What Alice may be interested in is to increase the amount of liquidity for her collection, because the community has been giving her feedback that, hey, there's just no buyers and sellers, and no one seems to be interested to list the NFTs in her collection. So what she can then do is she can look at the Collection.xyz vault and create an incentive vault that specifies and points to her particular collection of Snake NFT project. And then what happens is that you can select the start time, end time of when the rewards will be distributed, deposit in some ERC20 tokens, maybe Snake Coin itself that she have issued, and be able to then specify the delta and also the fees that she wants to essentially target. And voila, it's essentially created. And then Bob, in this case, as a sort of a market maker or a user of just the NFT ecosystem, really is a fan of the Snake project that Alice has created. So Bob, in this case, will go to Collection or hear about the vault maybe from Alice's Discord channel, and essentially look at the terms and figure out, hey, this actually seems pretty profitable for him to contribute liquidity to. He would then essentially deposit some Snake NFTs and maybe some wrap ETH to create a liquidity pool on Collection. And essentially when he does that, he is also creating a liquidity pool through Collection on Sudoswap. And what then happens is that he will receive an ownership token representing his stake in the particular pool. And then he would then deposit the liquidity pool token into the vault that Alice has just created, which would then automatically, as long as he satisfies the criteria that Alice has specified earlier, he would then accrue rewards over the period of time, from depositing liquidity. So it's as simple as that for interaction between a vault creator and also a liquidity provider.
Gotcha. And what has been the result in slippage, say liquidity or liquidity during the period of a collection incentivization program? So I guess phrased otherwise, like what has been the positive delta in terms of reducing slippage or increasing liquidity for, say, a given collection because of one of the incentivization programs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think what we have seen is that it really ranges for different collections. So there's some collections that have a pretty low floor price of like anything between 0.5 to 3 ETH. And of course, we have seen some collections that have a fairly high floor price of above 3 ETH all the way to 15, 20 whatsoever. So we've noticed that for some of the higher valued NFT collections, at least for today, just based on the amount of liquidity that collection is powering, the impact is relatively more muted as compared to for some of the lower priced NFT collections. So the range that we're seeing that most people have been setting defaults to and also contributing is in that plus minus 1 to 3% kind of range. And I think that's what we have been seeing. And it's actually more positive than many of what we have seen in the existing sort of marketplaces for those collections organically.
Gotcha. I guess then again, also, my first guess would be that the folks who are using it right now are either collections themselves or traders who would want to reduce slippage in a way that they feel like the incentivization can offset, I guess, like additional price savings from trading slippage for like large purchases over time. Just like a hypothesis for me. I'm curious, who have you guys observed have been the initial avid users?
Yeah, so there's like two essential groups of users over here, right? So of course you have the vault creators, which are in a way a user of the protocol as well. So we've seen that ourselves, we see that some of the initial vaults that we really like, of collections that we really like as a way to support some of the collections and also to kind of try the product out live, right? And of course, that has been received very positively by various communities, and I really like that part of what we have done. Since then, of course, we've seen some projects experiment with it, ask questions, and set some more smaller bolts up for themselves. And I think people are still kind of getting around to understanding how it works. We've heard some interesting, of course, comments which you can touch base on, that we've heard from the community about their hesitation of why they don't set up votes as well, which I can share a couple of points later. But from a user perspective of people who contribute liquidity, these tend to be people who already have more than one NFTs of a particular collection, or they are really reward or yield hunters that we've also seen to be very prevalent in the DeFi ecosystem. And essentially, they really know the maths of how impermanence laws, yield, and everything kind of how it relates together. So I think those are the primary uses we've seen. We've definitely seen some of the regular users do not really understand as well how liquidity provision works, because it's really a little bit of a step change from just looking at a listing on OpenSea and then making a buy order. So I think we still have a long way to go in terms of improving the user experience over there on helping users to essentially discover this a little bit better. But I want also to kind of circle back to my earlier point about liquidity provision in general, right? And essentially, we actually restrict liquidity providers in this particular case to encourage them to create what we call trade pools, which are two-sided liquidity pools where the user and the liquidity provider contributes NFTs as well as ERC20 tokens like Rep ETH. So by doing that, they're essentially committing and removing for themselves the optionality of selling or using and transferring these ETH and NFTs elsewhere. And by doing so, essentially, if they do not have sufficient incentives to do so, then they may not feel like they want to. So anyway, some of the projects that we have talked to, their main hesitation is actually with the underlying protocol that we support today. So as we know, there's very, very strong opinions and also interest in the NFT community for creators, especially about royalties. So because Collection right now integrates with Sudoswap, and Sudoswap actually charges a 0.5% fee on the protocol level, but does not actually offer a royalty fee for creators. Many of the creators have given us quite a bit of pushback when we asked them to consider contributing liquidity to the protocol. So I think that's some of the, just highlighting one of the things that we've definitely heard from projects and creators themselves.
Gotcha. I guess a couple questions there. Have there been cases where, say, increased liquidity from incentivization has actually resulted in higher volume and thus higher fees that offset incentivization fees for vault creators that were also, for vault creators that were also the people who were, performing the incentivization on Collection?
Yeah, that is actually a very interesting hypothesis, and one which we think over time would be validated. It is not validated today based on the data that we have shown. It's a couple of things, right? One is that the royalties are actually fairly significant in percentage for most of these collections, ranging from anything between 5% to 10%. And happy to share a model with you as well, but we do have an internal model that we've spec'd out for one of the more popular collection, and thinking and hypothesizing essentially, what if essentially most people actually use this protocol to essentially contribute liquidity and trade through it? Would the resultant increase in volumes because of how liquid the particular collection is actually lead to increase in trading volumes and so on, which would then help to increase the activity? But I think we don't have a conclusive answer here yet. So it's a long-winded answer to your question that we don't know enough at this point, but we hypothesize that if we tweak certain design elements, it could possibly work.
Gotcha. That's super interesting. I guess an extension of that is there could be a hypothesis where incentivization has resulted in significant higher liquidity for much cheaper from the collections perspective than providing the liquidity themselves or even working with a market maker. I'm curious what you guys think of that potential hypothesis.
Yeah. Maybe I can share about one particular example. I will name this particular partner of ours. But essentially, we have heard from market makers as well that they need a better way to essentially have projects also give them incentives for liquidity provision. So essentially, we shared the market maker in this particular case to essentially share the project, what Collection is as a protocol, and they were able to essentially self-serve and create the project creator essentially were able to create the incentive. And then through that, the market maker essentially contributes funds in NFTs as well as for funds to be able to be a market maker for that particular NFT collection. So we've kind of seen market makers be pretty receptive to using this as almost a way to receive rewards from projects. But definitely this is still a fairly small exception and not the rule for most of the use cases over here. But yeah, it's just kind of what we have seen so far.
Gotcha. I'm quite curious what you guys think of, say, existing liquidity incentivization models, either in the DeFi side or in the NFT side. I guess in the case of MetaStreet, something like that.
Jeremy, you want to take that?
Yeah, so definitely liquidity provision in the DeFi side is a lot more mature than on the NFT Fi side, right? So, just going back to one of the points raised earlier, I think a clarification point here is that when projects incentivize the vault right now, they essentially are paying a fee to kind of get the liquidity because they get nothing in return. The vault does not return fees to them. The vault returns fees to the pool. This is just in the way that the pool is set up on the underlying DEX that we have decided to build on, or rather the most popular one right now. Right? So definitely there's a lot of ways to go before we get to a level of maturity that essentially allows for vaults and projects to incentivize liquidity and get something in return. So there's a lot of building that needs to be done in this space for sure.
Yeah, I think just to add on a little bit about what we have learned as well from some of the other DeFi protocols in the space, I think not even like venturing too far to DeFi protocols, right? Like if you look at the AMM category within what we are sort of like in, the experience is still like honestly shittier than buying and selling and listing NFTs on NFT marketplaces like OpenSea, Blur, Gem, and so on. And that experience just needs to be better and improved upon further. The second, one I would just call out perhaps is that right now, I think the whole concept of creating liquidity and so on, as you mentioned earlier, is still really complicated. And for some of the other protocols that we've seen, they essentially use incentives to allow people to borrow and lend, or to encourage people to essentially buy with margin and so on. And we think that's really interesting. But I definitely want to see more user experience improvements on that particular piece. Some of them have tried using Google extensions to essentially make that more native. I don't know what the right formula is, but some of these things I think need to be tried. I think at the moment as well, there's just not enough like integrations and the composability across the different protocols. Right, every team is still kind of working sort of in silos, and I would love to, of course, see just better usage of tokens in general. Right, so for example, the liquidity pool token that we actually create as a result of you contributing liquidity to Sudoswap through Collection, that can actually be collateralized by some of the lending protocols, right? Because it has value. It represents, value of the underlying NFTs and ETH as well. And that can actually have a value in terms of maybe using as collateral for borrowing and so on. So we just think that right now, in this current situation of the market and where we are at, there's just so much that we can do over here. And so we're really excited to solve some of these problems going forward.
Awesome. I guess pivoting a little bit, what is Collection Staker and how does that work?
Yeah. So, I mean, Jeremy, feel free to correct me here. But essentially, I think that is what we have described earlier as the vault, what we call as the vault. Collection Staker is just really the name of the contract that we've named for the vault. And the contract essentially here validates the parameters of the incoming liquidity pool through the LP token. And then essentially we decide if, and the contract essentially decides if it should be let in or not. And the rewards, of course, are distributed based on the relative value of what is contributed to the vault, which means that if there's more people who actually deposit into the vault, then the rewards will be split across the people in a fair way in terms of the relative value they have. And this, of course, is just really the first set of the problems that we're trying to address, as we mentioned earlier.
I think that's right. It's pretty much the vault in the kind of traditional DeFi sense.
Gotcha. I guess one last question about the protocol. Where do you guys see this going? As in, yeah, I definitely see one of the biggest problems in NFTs is spot liquidity, and incentivization will help increase that. But I guess like off the top of my head, it seems to me that incentivization can only go so far in terms of getting NFTs out of people's wallets and into a vault or into a Sudoswap pool. But like what comes after once you've decreased slippage, once you've increased liquidity, once you've done this incentivization market, like what comes after?
That's a great question. Stay tuned for the next podcast that we come on. Yeah, I mean, we're like I think Jeremy alluded to, we really are spending a lot of time listening to what people are telling us, and they're just kind of consolidating some of these things and figuring out what we can focus on as well. But I think broadly speaking, we're very interested in the vault product that we have essentially built. We're very interested in, of course, looking at how we can improve the AMM experience as well for liquidity providers. So these are the two broad categories of things that we are very focused on. And hopefully we can add something incrementally interesting to the space.
I just want to add that, I mean, honestly, a lot of it has to come from increased liquidity, because only with increased liquidity, then you can have proper price discovery, you can have, good trading experience, so on and so forth, right? So I think the level of liquidity that we're seeing in NFT, apart from say something like a Bored Ape, it's really not where it needs to be to even kind of facilitate NFT for the kind of average and smaller collections.
Yeah, that makes sense, guys, and something that I think about a lot as well, especially just like opening up some of the long tail. I guess zooming out a little bit, where do you guys see NFT finance progressing over the next 12 to 24 months?
100x. Let me substantiate that kind of statement. We think that right now, the way I look at it personally is that we definitely think that the TVL and the volumes of the NFTified category needs to increase by 100x over the next 2 years. Maybe it's sooner, maybe it's later, I don't know, right? And if you were to ask me, where does the 100x come from? Of course, I just created that number. But I would say 10x is probably from the NFTified protocol innovations in a space. If we have better composability, just better integrations, and also just more of these products and more liquidity, as what Jeremy mentioned earlier, then we will see the 10x for sure coming from this area. The additional 10x, I think, that makes it 100x will really come from the asset itself. Right now, NFTs as an asset class, of course, is pretty interesting. The market cap is pretty decent for some of the top collections, ranging anything between 100 million plus to, 800 million for some of the top collections. But if you look at the non-fungible assets, I suppose, in the traditional world of real estate, it's actually a much bigger asset class as compared to the stock market, which if we have any notion of, for example, some of these interesting things like Web3 gaming, metaverse, and just just better art and, better membership and anything that is more interesting come up over the next 2 years, then we can easily see the asset market cap itself increasing by 10x. And of course, coming from Coin Market Cap previously, we obsess a lot about market cap. So I do think that with these two possible trends in the next 2 years and all these amazing builders building this space, we could see 100x in this particular space.
Anything you want to add, Jeremy?
No, I think that's a great answer, right? For what's going to happen over the next 12 to 24 months, hopefully.
But of course, let's not have a FTX situation again, somewhere in NFTs, right, guys? Let's just agree to not have it.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. And I think we got our title for the podcast as well, based off that clip, Spencer. So thanks for that. Well, I guess let's round it off. How can listeners get involved in the project, and how can they follow you guys? Yeah, just maybe just use this as a little spotlight to kind of put a little call to action for people listening in.
I love it. Thank you so much for that. So we are on Twitter at Collection.xyz. And we couldn't get the Collection.xyz handle. If you happen to be holding on to that, give us a shout. We are also on Discord at Collection.xyz. And of course, the website is Collection.xyz. So it's fairly straightforward, I suppose. But I think more importantly, if you're a builder and you're running an NFT project, and you're just like a passionate user of these protocols and want to give more feedback, we'll be open sourcing our version 2 after the launch. And we don't know when that exactly is yet, but we're targeting end of year, early next year. Reach out to us if you're a builder and you want to build with us for sure. Access our open source code, try it out, and give us some feedback. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks a ton, Jeremy, Spencer, for your time today. Listeners, go check out Collection.xyz. Follow their Twitter at Collection Web 3. And that's Collection Web with the number 3. Thanks, guys.
Follow me on Twitter. I'm 0xTayTayHoHo on Twitter. That's Tay with an E. And you can follow Ryan at _Helmass.
Yeah, and that's _HELMASS. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you soon.